Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please stand for the arrival of the Governor General, Acting Governor General of St. Lucia. Please remain standing for the National Anthem of St. Lucia. Ladies and gentlemen, you may have your seats. Our mistress of ceremonies for this evening is none other than Gemma Weeks. She is a St. Lucian writer, novelist, poet, and I will allow her to introduce herself.
Hi, good evening, everyone. As she said, I'm Gemma Weeks. I'm a screenwriter, an author, and a poet, and I also lecture at Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. It's wonderful to be here this evening. Welcome to the 2023 Derek Walcott Memorial Lecture. We warmly acknowledge His Excellency, Mr. Errol Charles, President of the Senate, Alvina Reynolds, Governor General Emeritus Dame Paulette Louisi, Dr. June Suma, a member of the UN Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, OAS representative Ms. Lily Ching, Executive Director of the Cultural Development Foundation Ramona Henry Wynn, Folk Research Center Executive Director Raisa Joseph, and Chairman of the FRC Embert Charles. Founder of the FRC Monsignor Patrick Anthony, Ms. Leslie Crane Mitchell, the head of UE Open Campus, Mr. Lyndon Arnold, Deputy Managing Director of the Bank of St. Lucia, our other dignitaries, and of course with great warmth, the late Derek Walcott's lovely widow, Ms. Sigrid Nama. We welcome you all, esteemed ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce a stellar figure of Caribbean academia, a lady who has been the recipient of numerous awards, including an OBE and the St. Lucia Cross, the Honorable Hazel Simmons-McDonald. We will now see a short video biography of her contributions. Enjoy.
Hazel Simmons-McDonald is a professor emerita of applied linguistics at the University of the West Indies. Prior to her retirement in 2014, she served as Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the Open Campus at the University of the West Indies. Earlier administrative appointments included service as Head of the Department of Language, Linguistics and Literature, Head of the Department of Linguistics, Deputy Dean of Outreach, Deputy Dean Planning, and Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the Cave Hill campus. She also served as the co-chair of the UE Cultural Studies Initiative. Her research interests include second language acquisition, the development of literacy by Creole and Creole-influenced vernacular speakers, and vernacular literacy within the formal education context. She served for several years as the Secretary-Treasurer of the Society for Caribbean Linguistics, as its Vice President for 1 year, and a 2-year stint as President of the Society from 2008. Her publications include articles and book chapters on second language acquisition, vernacular literacy, language education policy, literacy development, language and culture, and open and distance learning. She has also co-edited books on Creole-influenced vernaculars in education, and she collaborates on writing French Creole instructional texts for native speakers of Antillean French Creole. She has also published several English language texts for use at secondary and tertiary levels. She was a member of the International Council of Distance Education Standing Conference of Presidents 2008 to 2014, for which she led workshops and presented papers on lifelong learning and selected aspects of distance education. She was also an honorary advisor of the Commonwealth of Learning from 2009 to 2014. In her retirement, she continues to do some research in her field of specialization and devotes some time to writing fiction. She undertakes assignments occasionally as an education consultant, has worked on projects for the ESOP CEDA, UE DFATD Legal Impact Project, CXC, the OECS Early Literacy Project, the Uddingston Teachers College Literacy Diagnostic and Early Intervention Training Program, and the Universalia Management Group Limited for the review of CDB's education policy and strategy. In 2012, she was awarded the OBE, Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, for her contribution to education. In 2014, she received an award for outstanding contribution to education from the World Education Congress and was given an award for outstanding contribution to linguistics and multidisciplinary education by the Institute for Gender and Development Studies on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the University of the West Indies in February 2019. In 2022, she was awarded the SLC, the St. Lucia Cross, under the Order of St. Lucia.
We now welcome the Venezuelan ambassador to St. Lucia, Laif Escalona. Let's give a big round of applause for the Honourable Hazel Simmons-McDonald. I think we can do a little bit better than that. Let's give her a proper welcome. She will be presenting a creative exploration of Walcott's plays.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'd like to acknowledge the protocol that's been established because I couldn't possibly remember everybody, but I do recognize the acting Governor General and the former Governor General and friend and schoolmate, the family of Derek, Sigrid, and all friends and other St. Lucians who have come. I am honored, in fact, to have been asked to present this memorial lecture. And I thank the Festival Committee and the Chair for the kind invitation. I also wish to thank Mr. Walcott's daughters, Lizzie and Anna, for giving me permission to use some images from the Walcott collection. And I'm grateful to the Open Campus staff for helping me to access some of that material. I've listened with interest and admiration to previous presentations, in particular those given by contemporary St. Lucians, who, like Kendall right here, hello, who through meticulous analysis and discussion helped us to appreciate the wealth of Derek Walcott's poetry, the varied cadence of its lyricism, its thematic complexity, its richness. Knowing that Walcott focused attention on theatre from as early as a period as when he began to publish poetry, I thought I would search and reacquaint myself with some of the works we read as students. I found references to some plays of which I was not aware and which I was unable to access for close reading. He had a theme that seemed to underlie most of the things that he said. If this would work, I would start showing you some of what that is. Mr. Lewis?
to turn it on first.
Thank you. He said it was on. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. He said, what is needed is not a revival of something foreign, but a recognition of the authentic heritage at hand. And that knowledge, that comment about authentic heritage at hand is something that he seemed to have focused on in most of his work. And we will begin to look at a little bit of what he thought about this authentic heritage, this cultural heritage. However, for purposes of this presentation, I will focus on two of his early plays that were published in Dream and Monkey Mountain and other plays. And I will begin by sharing with you a chronology of plays, focusing on some of the thematic strands in them, look at Walcott's vision for a West Indian theatre, look at culture and identity in terms of how he deals with them in Siet Dauphin and Tijan, his brothers. And we will then go into some brief discussion about cultural transformation and national identity. His dramatic works, in my view, comprise an incomparable legacy of West Indian drama. I will, in talking about his plays, in that chronology, I will talk about what he had done, the series of plays he did, and I will make some comment on the thematic strands which emerge from them. I will proceed by reviewing his vision for the theatre, as I said, and I will then talk about some of these issues based on some of the current concerns that we have. Now, in the late 40s to the 60s, you can see the wealth of plays that he actually produced. He wrote his first play at the age of 16, and he had written complete scripts and drafts of many of the other plays by the time he was 29. He continued to work on those plays, revising some while they were being rehearsed for performance. He actually emphasized the importance of rehearsing the plays and changing, developing them, reviewing them, and improving them. So workshop was a very important part of his writing process. The public versions of the plays, when he actually did put them out, actually reflect his evolutionary creative growth as a dramatist. He wrote Harry Denier while he was still working as a teacher at St. Mary's College, before he left for the University College of the West Indies in Jamaica. And from those early years, he assumed leadership in the Student Guild as a writer and an artist. As president of the University Drama Society at the University College, he directed his play, Henry Denier, in 1952. And artist and entrepreneur that he was, he began two student magazines, The Barb and The Pelican. I'll show you the cover of one of the Pelicans. Oops, here we go. The Pelican, which is a student magazine that is still used by students in the Guild up to today. At that time, Walcott, in these years, his first 3 years at the university, he was already recognized by the university, by the Rockefeller Foundation, as a significant writer and a creative intellectual. And that helps to explain why he was the one who was sought to actually write the drama for the federation, which was supposed to happen, and to present the particular play that would inaugurate that event in Trinidad. And we will talk a little bit about what happened with respect to that. So Henri Christophe is one of the plays he wrote in his teens before he left for UCWI. And before he went, he directed that at the St. Joseph's Convent in 1950. And that was the first full-length play presented by the Arts Guild. He was instrumental in establishing the Arts Guild in collaboration with Maurice Mason, who used to be a teacher at the Methodist School. And Roddy is the one who took it over when Derek left and brought it to a high state of excellence, and it was regarded as one of the leading groups for drama in the Caribbean region. So the theme of his early play there, Henri Christophe, about the Haitian Revolution, also recurs in another play he wrote, Drums and Colors, which the UCWI commissioned, that's the one I was talking about, for the inauguration of the Festival of Arts in the UWI Federation. It was staged in the Royal Botanical Gardens as part of the festival in 1958. A critique of that particular play, the revision of that play, which was performed 10 years later in 1968, actually recorded the difference between the first version that he had presented and the second version. And this is what the critic said. The second version was less, I quote, less a celebration of the Haitian revolt against France than a study of why it went wrong, why its black heroes and the first black anti-colonial revolt produced tyranny and even greater hardships for blacks. What begins as a revolt against oppression and racism becomes a quest for personal power and results in tyranny to keep power, unquote. So Walcott revisited the themes he explored in these two plays later, much later, in The Haitian Earth. That was in 1984. And here in 1984, the St. Lucian government had commissioned the play to mark 150 years of emancipation from slavery. It premiered in that year, following a submission by the then director of the ministry. Were you a director of, not in the ministry, no. By Kendall Hippolyte and the late assistant director and the late Dunstan Santoma, who was a very good friend of Derrick's. The critical reviews of this play were published in The Voice of St. Lucia over about 3 weeks. And following the play, which was actually performed on the Morn, there were varied responses to the performance. Adrian Auger wrote in The Voice of 11th August, he said the play was too much like a pageant. It should have made its politics more explicit, with clear heroes and villains. Kennedy Samuel, who wrote in the Saturday Voice of the following week, said, Walcott's themes in the play are both universal and relevant to the post-colonial world. He noted that the leaders in the play, Walcott had them associated with pig imagery, and Walcott used a variety of registers of language in the play. But Kennedy wanted to raise another important question. He wanted to ask why the government's lack of support for the arts was still something that he had to be concerned about. Now, that was an issue that Derrick Walcott himself was concerned about in Trinidad with respect to the Trinidad government's response to the arts in that country. It remains a question of relevance today. Why do we not pay more attention to the arts? George Odlum, the late George Odlum, who was a friend of Derrick's and who was also a member of the Arts Guild at that time, commented on the play, and he talked about the ways in which Derrick moved from the stylized poetic drama of his youth to a racy earthiness in the play, how he used a honed-down economy of style and language which brought realism and dramatic point to the play. That was also published in The Voice during the second week. He commented on the dialogue between two of the characters in the play and talked about the maturity and the depth of feeling and the beautiful lines in their dialogue. And he recalled the lyricism of Derrick's earlier poetry. And he said, in the flowering of this beautiful relationship between the mulatto whore and the nigger peasant, Walcott makes his crucial statement, quote, love is what counts in life, unquote. So Walcott later published the Haitian trilogy comprising The Haitian Earth, Henri Christophe, and Drums and Colors. He wrote Juma while he was in New York on a Rockefeller Fellowship in 1958, and the St. Lucian Arts Guild, under the direction of Roddy, presented that in Trinidad. And Derrick decided he was going to come down and help Roddy, so he left 3 months before the fellowship was up, and he went to Trinidad to assist Roddy with that play. But he also presented Juma in August 1967 at a Caribana festival in Canada, because he was concerned about presenting West Indian drama to the rest of the world, something that he was consistent about right up to the end. In a tribute to Walcott following his death in 2017, Dixon McDonald recounts an anecdote about an intervention Walcott made at one of the rehearsals of Juma, which McDonald was actually was actually directing. So, you can read this. Here's what McDonald says. Roddy arrived at the back of the hall with somebody. I did not pay much attention. I was tense. Everything had to go right, or else. An unusual silence gripped the hall when Bap entered, coffin balancing on his head, 5 steps across. He was at center. He placed the coffin in its prearranged spot. Pause. A voice tremulous with rage broke the silence. No, not there. Too damn obvious. I looked back and Derek came strutting forward. That's mundane. Where's the director? I raised my hand and he acknowledged me as an object, real and visible. Oh, you, he said. Find your own center. Discard the obvious, or else everybody will be going around in circles by the time this skit ends. Without asking, he took over. He ordered the cast to begin again. Derek made a few minor changes to the closing scene and clapped heartily at the end, asking the actors to take a bow. He turned to me smiling. Good job, young man. I didn't have much to do. He also wrote another play, The Wine of the Country, in this early period, and it's thematically related to 2 other plays, In a Fine Castle and Franklin, in which he addresses issues associated with another theme that he explored, namely the place of whites in West Indian society. He deals with themes related to racial relationships and conflict experienced in the context of colonialism and his own personal reaction to what he referred to as his dual heritage, which he addressed explicitly, you will remember, in the poem A Far Cry from Africa. And this is by the way, Walcott and Derek in later years. Sorry, what did I say? McDonald. So here in A Far Cry from Africa, we have him. Here's the young Derek saying, I who am poisoned with the blood of both, where shall I turn, divided to the vein? I who have cursed the drunken officer of British rule, how choose between this Africa and the English tongue I love? Betray them both, or give back what they give. His treatment of this theme in later plays, for example, in a Fine Castle, 1970, in which he further revised as The Last Carnival in 1982, addresses the conflict of his dual heritage in the context of the multiracial societies in the Caribbean. For example, the French Creole plantocracy in Trinidad, which he explored further in the play Marie Laveau, in the wake of the uprising in that island in the previous year, and also because of increasing awareness and discussion about the Black Power movement. The Trinidad poet Anson Gonzalez, in a critique of the play Marie Laveau, suggested that it examined the future role of whites in Trinidad while, quote, looking critically on revolutionary rhetoric as futile carnival that will change nothing for the better, unquote. Other interpretations were that the play promoted interracial accord, and there are several other views that were presented about it, but everyone thought it was a very good play in which Derek was able to present total theater because he used music as well in that play. In both his treatment of characters in selected plays and statements he made in interviews, we discover his acceptance of his heritage and a reconciliation of the personal conflict about which he had written. He said, quote, what is needed is not a revival of something foreign, but recognition of the authentic heritage at hand. That's the statement I have on the first slide. In Tijon and His Brothers was awarded the prize for Best West Indian Tragedy in 1956 by the Jamaica Adult Drama Festival. The Sire Dauphin in 1953 and other plays set in St. Lucia are published in the volume Dream on Monkey Mountain and Other Plays. Walcott said he wrote Tijon and His Brothers in 3 days in New York. I didn't put this in here, but he said he was feeling lonely and he was estranged. They were talking about this Federation play, and they had left the discussion for a while, and he just was sitting in his hotel room. So he thought about the folklore, and he wrote Tijon and His Brothers. The consultation was sponsored by Rockefeller Humanities Drama Program about the pageant that we spoke about before, which would coincide with the West Indies Federation. Roddy directed it for the Arts Guild in December, and Derek himself directed it at the New York University Drama School, with Andre Tanker providing the music. Most critics regard Tijan, Dream on Monkey Mountain, and The Joker of Seville, which I'll say a little bit about in a while, as Walcott's quote-unquote legendary plays. And you'll probably see why this is so. If you ever saw Joker, you will understand why. Now, in the late 60s to the late 70s, these are some of the plays that he actually presented. In a Fine Castle, remember, the earlier version of that play was Wine of the Country. He actually focuses on the very same themes, okay, about whites within the West Indies and his own dual heritage. He explores that even in a later version, which he actually published. Franklin, a play about racial conflict, won the Barbados Arts Council Prize for Best React Play. The Charlatan, with music by Galt McDermott. He started a partnership with Galt McDermott to produce several plays, including Joker. Joker was the first one. And he dedicated a play, Remembrance, to his mother and to older teachers of that generation, who he said actually were excellent teachers in exposing them to literature, to the arts. He talks specifically about Greek and Latin. And he said those classical studies actually formed a lot of his own interest. In the plays in this period, Walcott continued to explore themes related to multiracial issues in the region. And as the director of the Trinidad Theatre Workshop, he continued to work on plays which he had written or begun to write from early in his career, and to develop them, as I said before, through rehearsals in the workshop. He wrote The Charlatan, and like Franklin and In a Fine Castle, those were refined in the context of the rise to the Black Power movement in the late 60s and early 70s. And he continued to explore themes of identity, of the multicultural composition of the region, and of the psychological effects of colonialism. In the plays that he wrote towards the end of the period, he also explored changes in the culture of the region, including the influence of American culture on the region. And he in one piece, he talked about the Americanization of the Caribbean in sort of slightly derogatory terms. He didn't like the idea that we were accepting and just regurgitating things. So he had a concern about that. In the program for pantomime, which Ken Cosby directed at the Little Carib Theatre, Walcott wrote, and I quote, "Pantomime is about two actors and their different racial and cultural origins, creating whatever conflicts exist from their different approach to the theatre, its ritual, its meaning, its style." He thought, too, that it would show that the self-torturing schizophrenia that precedes the resolution of an identity can achieve that resolution with dignity. In the mid-70s, he produced some of the most popular musical works, which represent total theatre with music and dance interwoven between. I don't know how many of you here might have seen The Joker of Seville, which he produced here in the Geese Shed, 1975. Music again by Galt McDermott. It was commissioned by the Royal Shakespeare Company. It premiered in Trinidad, and that is still considered to be one of Walcott's best plays. O Babylon followed, which is one about Rastafarians in Trenchtown in Jamaica, and Steel, about the creation of the steel pan in Trinidad. I thought I was going to include a picture of steel, but I must have missed it. And The Cape Man, which he did with Paul Simon. And that one wasn't as good. Paul Simon wrote the music, and Derek did some of the lyrics. So in these musicals, let me show you what they are. The musicals, The Joker, O Babylon, Marie Laveau, which I spoke about before, Steel, Pantomime, and The Cape Man. In these musicals, he realized the vision for total theatre. Joker was commissioned by the Royal Shakespeare Company, and they asked Walcott to write a verse translation of a 16th century Spanish play, Tirso de Molina's El Bulador de Sevilla. Walcott transformed it into a total West Indian theatrical production, which was considered to be, quote, the highest achievement of the Trinidad Theatre Workshop and of West Indian theatre, when it was performed at the Little Carib in 1974. It also received high acclaim in Jamaica and here in St. Lucia, where we spoke about, when it was performed in 1975 in the Geese Shed. If you remember, performance, I was here, so I do remember really clearly. Performances were sold out every single night, and I wanted to go see it more than one night. I was completely captured by the music, the lyrics, through which Walcott artfully served to enhance delineation of character, advancement of plot. I remember purchasing the LP right after the first show and going home and singing over and over till my father was quite upset with me when I was talking about, "Oh, dark heat in this bust," which is the song that Sisbia sang just before the seduction by Don Juan after he was shipwrecked. So she would go, how did it start again? "If from the darts of Cupid's bow I, Tisbia, am immune, till bright is my unblemished brow as the unblemished moon." But let's see how she sang it, okay? So this is, that's not the girl who acted as Tisbia, it was Miss King, I remember, but this was Carole LaChapelle, the dancer who choreographed lots of the plays for Walcott, and she was acting Anna. Here she is singing.
That I see what I see, depending before me, as I stand here divided between mercy and modesty. Should my stand be one-sided, can truth be so naked? Where are all of those vows that I just prided myself on? Ghost days as a little voice, how's that another little voice sings on? Breasts, why are you heaving? Heart, why do you beat tiny feet? Aren't you leaving? Then go if you must all the tempest that's seething in the ankle burst. See the heave of this bosom, oh, dark heat in this bust. Oh, beautiful morning, can this be us?
And of course, throughout the play, Walcott does show how lust, actually, of Don Juan helps him to actually seduce so many of the other women. But we won't go into that because this is not the part we were focusing on. But I do want to play another bit of Don Juan Tenorio. And that character, I think, was actually one of the best, he says. I'll play a little bit of Don Juan for you as well. If I can remember how it started, I would have sung some for you, but I can't, so, okay, he says.
Don Juan Tenorio knows when to retire. A night like this with its fine sweat of stars, a laughing tropic night as this one was, not marbled into fable like your heroes, but flesh with all its blemishes and scars. His legend is the living air, the wind that cries the room of every shuttered mind, immortal and defiant as desire. Don Juan Tenorio grease hell with an equal fire.
And in the previous verse he was saying, why? I'll come, it's best to go down a living lover than a nasty old man penning his memoirs of liaisons with duchesses and whores, and nightcap shriveling prepuce with bed sores, toothless and creased with grease, one of those bores who draws on lechery and its hard luck, and turn their fears to philosophic muck, page after page, to live their fury over, simpering de Sade and cretinous Casanova. O Babylon received mixed reviews with regard to its representation of the Rastafarian community. And this later play, Steel, as I said before, captures the story of the steel pan in Trinidad. Both of these were published in one volume together, Joke of Seville and O Babylon, later on. Critics in Trinidad who saw the restaging of Marie Laveau at the Little Carib In 1980, he wrote mixed reviews of it. Of interest is one written by Victor Cattell in the Trinidad and Tobago Review. He noted a shift in Walcott from using what he calls the creative tensions of unresolved conflicts towards a psychic harmony of wholeness. As he said, this represented a change from the position he had taken in Dream on Monkey Mountain to an acceptance of their synthesis in a Caribbean syncretism. The later plays in which Walcott explores the theme of identity presents a more balanced approach than the anguish his identity conflict revealed in the poem that we just spoke about, A Far Cry from Africa. Now, Steele is set in the community of La Ventille in Port of Spain, and in many ways it's a celebration of the resilience of those in that community who, despite economic constraints, were able to create the steel pan. The soundtrack of Steele, and I'd hoped to bring a couple for you, but I must have left it out. It was recorded live while the Trinidad Theatre Workshop performed it in Trinidad. Now, the last set of plays, 80s to the 2000s, we have all of these, and I wasn't able, apart from one or two of them, I wasn't able to read them all. But he wrote those well into the new millennium, as you can see. The last one that I found was Oh Starry, Starry Night, was done in 2014. So I need to take you a little further on here. Wow. In that historical play, he writes about two artists, Van Gogh and Gauguin. And he deals with themes about art, friendship, fame, themes which intersected his own life. Moonchild is what you're looking at now, is set in St. Lucia, and I found that very interesting because it seemed to me that he was exploring themes that he had introduced in Tijan, but focusing on topics related to the supernatural and the spirit and spirituality in this last play. He reintroduces the planter figure, similar to the devil character in Tijan, and the goal of this character in Moonchild is to take over the island for the purpose of development. And here Walcott is presenting an issue that is of more concern now than perhaps it was when he wrote Tijan. This has to do with the effects of what is casually referred to as development, but which often involves selling chunks of the island and transforming the landscape, often without due care. The plot focuses on the efforts of a family to protect the people's heritage, and the mother strikes a bargain similar to the one that was struck in Tijan, namely, if any one of her three sons could drive the planter figure, the developer, to display anger, the family, the people, would retain the right to their place and live in peace. Now, here Walcott is touching on issues related to the effects of relinquishing parts of the island and what some of us may consider the mutilation of prized parts of the island. And you may recall the attention that Kendall Hippolyte gave to this topic in his 2022 Nobel Memorial Lecture, in which he reminded us, and I quote, that the national identity is nurtured by a celebratory love of the landscape, unquote. And he emphasized the importance of protecting that landscape as he demonstrated the ways in which our poets promote the tradition of nurturing and protecting the landscape in their writing. In an interview that he gave to a reporter for The New Yorker in 1971, following the New York production of Dream on Monkey Mountain, Walcott explained that the play is about, quote, the West Indian search for identity and about the damage that the colonial spirit has done to the soul, unquote. In the interview, he offers a description of the landscape that inspired Dream. And this is what he said. I was born in St. Lucia, a very green, misty island, which always has a low cloud hanging over the mountaintops. When you come down by plane, you break through the mist, and it's as if you were entering some kind of prehistoric Eden. Monkey Mountain, where macaque lives, is really a peak called La Saucière. He commented once that he sometimes built a character in his plays around an actor, and an example referred to in this regard in that interview is the character of Macaque in Dream on Monkey Mountain, which was played almost exclusively by the Theatre Workshop member Errol Jones. But there was one occasion when Jones was away and Walcott asked for Arthur Jacobs from the Arts Guild. He thought he would have been the best person to fit that role. And Jakes had to fly to Trinidad to act as Macaque. And the reviews were that he did a very good job, almost with. Walcott said when he started about this play, when I started to write this play, I remembered an almost inhuman, I've gone too far, have I? I remembered an almost inhuman man named Macaque Rougier. I suppose his name meant Rougier's monkey, because he worked for a man named Rougier, who used to come into town and get terrifyingly drunk. At the same time, I was influenced by the Japanese no plays and the whole kabuki thing. I thought that I could see in the truly ethnic West Indian dances some of the surviving, celebrating, or warrior dances. We use flute and drums, and we have a great oral tradition in the islands that gives us a reference for speech. He emphasized the importance of revision and the lapse of time between the writing. The dates would have indicated several years passing between his initial drafting of a script and its publication. I think that lapse reflects the careful attention he gave to improve the work. A comment about revision that has been attributed to him and which appeared in Tapia indicated that high standards can only be reached through a definite program, exercises, and interim performances as part of a repertoire. Local audiences, however, have a carnival mentality, he said. They always want something new. They do not understand that an artist wants to see what has been created and improve it through revision. So his vision for West Indian theatre, which he really took on for the whole of his life, before he left UE, he created the Arts Guild, as I said before, and he supported the efforts of Roddy, who took over the leadership and led the Arts Guild to much success. It was recognized as one of the leading drama groups in the region. And by the time he completed his studies at UCWI, he received the Rockefeller Fellowship in New York, which I referred to earlier. He returned to Trinidad to assist Roddy and the Arts Guild with the staging of 2 of his early plays. And that's when he was invited by Beryl McBurney, who was at the workshop with him, to use her Carib theatre, of which she was director of dance, for the Trinidad Theatre Workshop. Roddy is supposed to have said that it was through the experience at the camp that Walcott could see, quote, a way to go beyond folk themes, setting, and dialect to an acting style that would be West Indian, unquote. Walcott did not pursue the attraction of going to Europe as other artists had done, but he settled in Trinidad, where he lived for the next 20 years and worked to realize his vision for a successful West Indian theatre. It's worth noting some of the comments others in his circle made about what he hoped to achieve. Bruce King wrote, quote, he returned to the West Indies with a vision of creating his own theatre company of international standards with its own West Indian acting style, which he would lead and direct, and which would perform his plays and those of classical and contemporary world theatre. He had in mind a director's theatre in which he would shape every visual detail, gesture, movement, or spoken phrase. It would be a highly visual as well as textual theatre, unquote. He said also that he would commit his life to creating such a theatre company and raise West Indian drama to international professional standards. In an article in the Sunday Guardian, Walcott himself expressed his vision in this way. He said, the burden of the West Indian playwright is that he must create not only a theatre, but its environment. The workshop began with the notion of finding an honest, powerful performing style. Now the task is to create a body of West Indian plays equal in power to foreign plays. The workshop aims at international standards and responses to the modern language of theatre. This has been achieved in poverty and deprivation. The workshop is an interracial company which will perform the great plays of the world with West Indian plays. The workshop needs a home where it can build a larger audience for the arts, as well as providing the actor with employment. The workshop is a real West Indian company. So finding a home for the Trinidad Theatre Workshop occupied his attention throughout the time he led the group as dramatist and director. In his essay, in What the Twilight Says, which prefaces the Dream on Monkey Mountain collection publication, Walcott not only writes about the difficulties he faced during his years in Trinidad as director of the theatre workshop, but he also writes about the conflict of identity he faced in his early years. And he describes the inspiration from local scenes and events that fueled his interest in theatre. In one example, he describes the Salvation Army conducting their service at the intersection of Mary Ann Street and Chaussee Road. And the Walcotts lived on Chaussee Road, just a few houses up from Mary Ann Street. And this is what he says. He said, quote, "The recruiting patrol, their beat thudding so loud that the stars shook, was to drum an army of Catholics into service by the joy of their performance, to arrest whoever paused, to draw children in a ring around the lantern light until there would be more than spectators. Yet, like the long applauded note, joy soared further from two pale children staring from their upstairs window, wanting to march with that ragged, barefooted crowd, but who could not." He describes this group, this scene, as what he calls the shadows of his first theatre. He says, "Just as at Christmas, in the streets, the devil in red underwear with a hemp beard." There he is. That's a sketch by Walcott, by the way, of the devil with the hemp beard. "A pitchfork and a monstrously packed crutch, backed by a molasses." If you remember the Papa Jab, you'll see that that description is quite accurate. "Backed by a molasses-smeared chorus of imps, would perform an elaborate black mass of resurrection at the street corners. He and his brother were already creating their own little theatre. On the veranda, with his back to the street, he began marathon poems on Greek heroes which ran out of breath, lute songs, heroic tragedies. But these rhythms, the Salvation Army parodies, the devil's Christmas songs, and the rhythms of the street itself were entering the pulse beat of the wrist. These are the things that fueled his desire, the folk images and the folk tales for writing." In the essay, he lists several of the characters from other theatres, he said, who peopled the landscape and created what he called, quote, "the theatre of degeneracy," but which he claims, quote, "sank like a stain and taught us symmetry." For him, the challenge was to create a new theatre, a West Indian theatre, working with these impressions emanating from the folk culture, the richness of tales that captured his and his twins' imagination as they observed from their home on Chaussee Road. In his view, the body, the gesture, the voice would create a unique theatre experience. And this is what he says about gesture. This is he rehearsing with Albert Laveau in Trinidad. And actually, they said that he liked to show what the gesture, they're working on a gesture, I'm imagining. "If the body could be reduced once more to learning, to a rendering of things through groping mnemonic fingers, a new theatre could be made, with a delight that comes in roundly naming its object. Out of it, with patience, new reverberations would come," unquote. But the reverberations did come, with recognition of his plays and having them performed and praised in several countries outside the region, with the respect for his writing from literary critics, with the elation of audiences caught up in the action of a plot and enjoying the blend of music and dance with the drama. Although he voices his recognition of the success he had, his tone is somewhat subdued and tinged with a bit of regret in What the Twilight Says, as he reflects on what had been achieved. He says, "When one began 20 years ago, it was in the faith that one was creating not merely a play, but a theatre, and not merely a theatre, but its environment. Then the twilight most resembled dawn. Then how simple it all seemed." And later in the essay, he says, "One does not lament the 20 years spent in trying to create this reality of a theatre, nor could one have contempt for its successes and the honors that, quote-unquote, recognition has brought. But the ceremony of reward is as misguided as the supposedly defunct system of long service. Without knowing it, the folk forms had become corrupted by politics," unquote. And as we read through his articles in the Trinidad Guardian, for whom he worked for quite a while, in fact, as a literary critic, we learn of his disappointment with politicians for not supporting the arts in the ways he believed they should have in order for the arts to make a difference in society. He also regarded the Back to Africa trend, what he referred to as, quote, the African revival, unquote, as an escape to another dignity. I'm assuming it's a dignity different from that of being a West Indian and celebrating that West Indian identity. In What the Twilight Says, the same essay, he asserted, quote, pastoralists of the African revival should know that what is needed is not new names for old things or old names for old things, but the faith of using the old names anew, so that mongrel as I am, something prickles in me when I see the word Ashanti, as with the word Warwickshire, both separately intimating my grandfather's roots, both baptizing this neither proud nor ashamed bastard, this hybrid, this West Indian, actually endorsing that West Indian identity that he has accepted over time. In the essay, he moves on from his comment about the 20 years to describe a scene, something which he says is like a hallucination, but which he can see clearly. And it's an image of a band of travelers, he says, walking with him up to a ridge from which they look down on the city of Castries. He says, it was not a vision, but a memory, though its detail was reduced, as in dreams and in art. But knowing the place could not tell me what it meant. There was only this reduced image of real actors on a real windy grass ridge, which was, of course, the Morne, overlooking the harbor of Castries and the banana fields to windward, on the very spine of St. Lucia. Perhaps it meant that I had brought us home. The cycle finished. When 20 years ago we imagined cities devoted neither to power nor to money, but to art, one had the true vision, a pure vision of what art could do, of what art created. So let's move on then to look at culture, identity, and the place that we wanted to talk about. His conception of an identity for a West Indian theatre was grounded in the uniqueness of West Indian culture. King reported that as the resident dramatist of the TTW, his vision was, quote, to create his national and personal identity from many sources, unquote. He embraced the idea of a multicultural West Indian identity. Like most others at the time, Walcott was disappointed at the failure of the Federation because he had hoped that it would have provided an economic basis for supporting the arts and a West Indian culture. In an article in the Sunday Guardian, he expressed the view that being West Indian was a source of identity, and the independence of islands, because the islands were then becoming independent one at a time, Jamaica and Trinidad, he thought that that would result in micro-nationalist trends, quote, artificial national cultures that he thought would lower standards. And he thought that that lowering of standards would be detrimental to the arts. King describes the conflict Walcott faced as that of choosing success in America or adhering to his ideal of creating a West Indian theatre. He said, Walcott was divided between his desire to create a West Indian literature and theatre of international standards and his ambition to make a name and money for himself abroad. The West Indies was his subject matter, his culture, what he wrote about, and provided the only actors, critics, and audiences that understood his plays and what he had achieved with the workshop. He wanted to show that the West Indies could be as good as Europe or North America, but the West Indies could not provide the material conditions for professional theatre, and those material conditions would have been with respect to the resources necessary to pay the employee that Walcott spoke about and to give them the support that they needed to put on performances. But he chose to remain in the Caribbean, and he expressed concern about American productions of his plays. He didn't think that they would quite grasp what needed to be done. He said he thought that American aesthetics, black or white, were contrary to the West Indian. And he voiced these concerns to a man, Gordon Davidson, in Rockefeller, who had supported one of his visits, in which he indicated that he wanted his own company to perform Dream. His argument was that Quote, "The spirit of dream is the soul of its characters and requires Americans, whether black or white, to have a humility of interpretation. Otherwise, it will become part of American imperialism, quote, redirecting its force inwards towards America itself." A conclusion that was drawn from this and the other arguments he presented in that letter is that Walcott was warning against transforming the cultural complexities of the Caribbean and its affirmation of dream into another American black protest text. He wanted the play to express the spirit of a people and the spirit of that people with the spirit of the Caribbean people. In an article titled Conversation with Derek Walcott, Therese Mills, who also wrote for the Trinidad Guardian, asked him a question about the demonstrations that had happened in Trinidad and Eric Williams' call for the decolonization of the arts. And this is what Walcott said. "If there were real decolonization, the government would rid themselves of the 19th century notion of the artist as someone born to suffer. Both the government and radicals are afraid to see the reality of West Indian culture as it has developed. 10 years ago, they were proud to be British. Now they're proud to be African. There is a refusal to be Trinidadian or St. Lucian. We waste energy picking out symbols. West Indian culture is a fusion which makes the slogan of decolonization meaningless. Writers are daily going through decolonization, but writers do not use such stupid words because they are receptive to all that is of value, including Europe, Africa, and America." His views about identity were predicated on his ideas and experience of a West Indian culture. He asserted that West Indian identity must be found within the West Indies, including its mixture of races and cultures. So, what do we learn about West Indian culture and identity from his drama? The early plays published in Dream on Monkey Mountain and other plays explored themes related to identity, culture, including the importance of understanding and preserving that culture. Some of the main themes include colonialism and its effects, efforts to shake off the limitations of slavery, of racism, of recovering one's true identity. In these plays, Walcott also addresses topics related to language, history, poverty, and survival in trying circumstances. In an interview with Edward Hirsch, he explained that what he tried to do with language in the play The Sea at Dauphin, he said, "When I tried to translate the speech of the St. Lucian fisherman into an English Creole, all I was doing was taking that kind of speech and translating it or retranslating it into an English-inflected Creole, and that was a totally new experience for me." So the translations and the retranslations from French Creole to what he calls an English Creole are the forms that Martha Isaac refers to as calqued forms that are similar to those found in some other Creole English varieties spoken elsewhere in the Caribbean. These are the structures that form the basis of the English lexicon vernacular we now use widely in St. Lucia as a third choice of communication. Perhaps we speak it more now than at the time when Walcott was doing his translations and when he wrote Sea at Dauphin. At that time, we used French Creole more widely. In the collection of plays in Dream on Monkey Mountain, he is consistent in the use of the languages we speak in St. Lucia. And it is through language and accompanying action that we understand the themes with which he deals in these plays. Through the use of all three, he is validating St. Lucian cultural heritage and demonstrating the richness and value of St. Lucia's linguistic heritage to the arts. An exchange between Garcia and Afa, two fishermen characters in The Sea at Dauphin, show Walcott's skillful use of blending the dialects. So let's share a bit of that. Here's Garcia. "Does sea do what it have to do? Like the wind, like the birds, like me? Cigarette?" He offers Afa a cigarette. "American." Afa, wiping his hands. "Merci. Bug. Ooh, wish. A whole one?" They laugh. "It's only natural for wind to blow so hard, but to turn and turn. You going out? You won? It's staying so for next month, compare. And in all my life, I never see it more vex. and it have many season fishing nas. I see it bad, but never in a life like this. But is work or starve. So this exchange introduces a dominant theme in C, namely the struggle of the fishing community to survive, their awe and respect for nature as well, the fury of the sea when it's really right up. Garcia, returning from a fruitless fishing trip on the same day, berates Afa for insisting on going out to fish with Augustine. This is what he says. Men who don't believe in nothing, unless it's accident, who don't believe in love. They head like Dauphin land, all rock, and in the rock worm, and in the worm head is only death. Afa, you are this man. Greedy will kill you. Old man, talking to Hunakin, who was standing there. Old man, you choose a hard companion. You choose Afa, the hard companion. Go home and sleep. Die in your hut. The sea not make for men. God's self can't sail it. Recognizing the fury of the sea, which made him come back from his attempted trip to go fishing that same morning. So through the confrontation between Afa and Augustine that ensues, Walcott hints at the dangers of being blinded by greed. And through the intervention of the old man, Hunakin, he shows the futility of resorting to violence. So Garcia and Afa continue their fight. And I'll read this one. I think I'll go back. I don't want you to read this yet. It doesn't matter. So Afa says, but listen please to the exchange. Afa says, Viejo, sea is waiting, not nobody, old, not old. You know how many canoe gone? Sunrise is sun lying down when fisherman late. You know, early you go, early you come back. And fish must sell, quick, quick, or fish rotten fast, faster than old woman dead. Augustine rushes at him and says, Afa sakwe sala. Because of the very careless and unthinking comment that Afa had made to the old woman dead, who was Hunakin's wife, who had died before, Rema. Okay, so he's mad. He rushes at him. And Afa says, can you imagine a scene like that? Have you seen one? Afa says, facing him, Vini, Vini tikunyo, come. And they stand facing each other, and Augustine has a stone which is picked up. And Augustine says, you don't have no heart. You don't have no compassion. All you want is money, money, money. You same like a damn dog. A dog is what you are. And he's getting nearer to Afa as he says this. And your mother, and your mother, and your mother. And Hunakin, seeing that they're coming to blows, says, Mes enfants, mes enfants. He's the old man putting the peace, okay? So he prevents the altercation, the fight. They're resorting to violence over the matter of Afa's careless reference to Hunakin's dead wife. And through Hunakin, he also introduces other values, that of working for a living, of not being a mendicant. And this is where this piece comes in when Hunakin, out of frustration and tired, he wanted to go fishing to get some money. He says, when Rema dying, she didn't want more medicine. You know, we could not beg. But then I begged for 1 whole year. Then she catch sick again. And Rema say, no medicine, we must not beg. I did not want to beg, and Rema die. The first time I did beg you was last night, to work. I cannot beg or bend down to make garden. I know, have friend, but friend and pride is different. It's just a work to feed old man and the dog. So he's saying that he cannot beg. He wanted to go fishing so he could earn some money. And he's not going to be a mendicant, okay? So this whole idea of of the values come through this old man, and elsewhere in the plays, Walcott uses the old person to express little gems of wisdom, and we'll see 1 or 2 in a minute. Now, if in Tijan and his brothers, he draws on the folklore of the island, and he uses the chants of the Christmas Mask, which he refers to in what the Twilight says. The scene of the devil in red underwear, which he and Roddy watch from their balcony, is just one of the scenes that were what he calls the shadows of his first theater. He uses the chant from the street mask to herald the intention of the old man, Papa Bois, the planter, the colonial master, the devil, to defeat the brothers and the chorus of devils in the play. Repeat its repeat it after he successfully defeats Rouge and Mijan by goading them to anger, and then he eats them. This excerpt from scene 3 that I'm going to show you in a minute shows his skillful use of the French Creole chants to emphasize the evil intent of the devil planter character. And he writes it in the play using the French spelling, but I'll say it in the way we say it in Creole. This sketch is by Walcott of the old man, Papa Bois, as he thought of him in Tijan. So the sketch. So it's dawn, and it's the forest, and there are two crosses marked Rouge and Mijan because the devil has eaten them and buried the bones. And the old man, that's the plantation owner, is sitting on the log, and the creatures are heard around him, and Tijan's mother is in the hut. Tijan is his mother. So the devils off stage are saying, Bai jabla manger tima mayon de toi timamai. Bai jabla manger tima mayon de toi timamai. And the old man is saying, Aye, feed the devil the third, feed the devil the third. Power is knowledge, knowledge is power. And the devil devours them on the hour. So the devils, Bai jabla manger tima mayon de toi timamai. And the old man speaking to the audience says, Well, that's 2 good meals finished with a calm temper. And if all goes mortally, 1 more is to come. He shrieks and points to where Tijan is in the hut consoling his mother. Ay, 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 a chicken is to come, a calf, a veal-witted young man, tender in the flesh, soft in the head and bones, tenderer than old muscle power, and simpler than that net empty atheist, reference to Mijan. For the next dish is man-wit, common sense, but I can wait, gathering damp, rotting faggots. Aye. He recognizes that Tijan is smarter, more caring and compassionate than his brothers, and he's willing to wait to defeat him and to devour him also. Walcott comments on his own use of language in his work and how he used it creatively to reflect his West Indian culture. Speaking of himself in Twilight, he said, What would deliver him from servitude was the forging of a language that went beyond mimicry, a dialect which had the force of revelation as it invented names for things, one which finally settled on its own mode of inflection, and which began to create an oral culture of chants, jokes, folk songs, and fables. This, not merely the debt of history, was his proper claim to the New World. And he says, It did not matter. These are 2 scenes, by the way. One is the planter and the old man, and Mijan speaking out of his book, and the other one is from Dream with Moustique and Macaque, and I'll make reference to those in a minute. He says it did not matter how rhetorical, how dramatically heightened the language was, if its tone were true, whether its subject was the rise and fall of a Haitian king or a small island fisherman, and the only way to recreate this language was to share in the torture of its articulation. This did not mean jettisoning culture, but by the writer's making creative use of his schizophrenia, an electric fusion between the old and the new. I understand the fusion of the old and the new to refer in part to the forging of traditions, the balance of our traditions that formed our heritage and gave us the unique identity to which he refers. For Walcott himself, they were the dialects of his archipelago, to which he referred in his Nobel acceptance speech, and which constituted for him, quote, the condensations of a refreshing element, rain and salt. Speaking about education, the patois and the language of the classroom in a piece entitled Meanings, which appeared in Savaku in 1971, Walcott described the task of the creative artist as being, quote, to fuse the old and the new, forge a new creation, and thus lay claim to his birthright. On the matter of culture, Claire Cramsch argued in her discussion on the relationship between language and culture that, and I'm quoting, words reflect their author's attitudes and beliefs, their point of view. Language expresses cultural reality. It embodies cultural reality, and it symbolizes cultural reality, quote unquote. She also observes that cultural identity is a question of both indenture to a language spoken or imposed by others, and a personal, emotional investment in that language through one's having acquired it. In using language varieties spoken in St. Lucia in these early plays, Walcott is embodying the cultural reality And he does so by reflecting the culture that was, the traditional culture, the culture as it was at the time of his writing. And all of this is mediated through the culture of his imagination. He presents us with material that remains relevant for all of us humans through time. The themes in the plays speak to these. In the Siete Dauphins, the old man Hunakin shows that violence is not the answer to solving problems. The community's response to the news of Hunakin's suicide also hints at the concern of the village for the elderly, the concern for their well-being and their safety. In the prologue to the program of a performance of Tijan and his brothers, Walcott stated that local culture needs both preservation and resurgence. He said, quote, "We present to others a deceptive simplicity that they may dismiss as provincial, primitive, childish, but which is in truth a radical innocence. That is what our fable is about," unquote. Tijan is this and much more in terms of the thematic strands it presents. There is the dominant theme of the efforts of the brothers to get rid of the oppression of the plantation owner, who embodies the characters of Papa Bois, the planter, and the devil, and who also represents the colonial power that subjugates the locals through enforced labor on his plantation. He defeated Grosjean, whose strength of arm, strength alone, could not outdo the wiliness of the old man. He defeated Mijan, whose book learning did not endow him with clarity and was of no use to him either in his trade as a fisherman or in dealing with the cunning of the devil. Both of them lost the contest and were eaten by the devil. Both of them showed lack of care for the animals, and both displayed greed, an obsession with the desire to make money, which for them represented success. Both were disrespectful and rude to the animal characters in the play, and by extension to nature in the play. It was Tijan, the youngest, who was courteous to the animals and who showed care and respect for nature. To the frog, Tijan says, "You have your own beauty, like the castanet, music of the cricket over there." To the firefly, he says, "I have often mistaken you at night for a star." To the collective animal group, he says, "God bless you, small things. It's a hard life you have, living in the forest." And in the scene of Tijan's farewell interaction with his mother, Tijan says, "You have taught me the strength to do whatever we will, and love God is enough." And the mother says, "I feel I shall never see you again." And he says, "To return what we love is our glory, our pain." And the old man is fed up with that. He says, "Enough of these sentiments. I'm hungry and I'm cold. I want to eat Tijan." Tijan says, "Now pray for me, Mama. The sun is in the leaves." And the mother says, "The first of my children never asked for my strength. The second of my children thought little of my knowledge. The last of my sons now kneels at my feet. Instinct be your shield. It is wiser than reason. Conscience be your cause, and plain sense your sword." Then the bolom, you see a photo of the bolom in one of the performances, rolls towards the huts and the drums are beating. And the bolom addresses the mother, "Old trees shaken of fruit. This green one must die." Okay, so here you have the whole idea of the old woman Tijan's mother giving him the kind of advice that would help him to be successful and to use his resourcefulness against this character whose only objective is to subjugate him and to eat him. So the old people in the play are represented by Walcott as having wisdom, as having the knowledge that would help for the survival of the young ones. I'll just say something very briefly about Dream of Monkey Mountain and then we go on. Dream on Monkey Mountain is perhaps the most complex in the play, and to discuss it, I think maybe you need a whole lecture just talking about these plays. Our main theme is the detrimental effects of colonialism in that play, and through the representation of a dream motif, Walcott examines the psychoses of the main character, Macaque. Macaque experiences his soul-searching as he seeks his true self. His journey shows what is required for finding one's self-esteem, establishing or recovering one's identity. At another level, it can be read as a quest of people for discovering personal and cultural identity. In the next play in that book, Malcochon or The Six in the Rain, That play treats with themes related to the frailty of human nature, with the importance of caring for others in community, of the need to forgive. In this play, again, Walcott uses the character of an old man to present words of wisdom about life and living in community. And this is what the old man says. A man must learn to love and forgive all that he loves. We're not tigers and serpents and dogs. We are men. We don't murder and curse. We leave the old savagery. When you ask for justice, make sure it's not revenge. And when you ask for truth, make sure you don't mean justice. And later, consoling a dying Chatal, who was a murderer, he says, man have to live with man, Chatal. So Chatal is being encouraged to forgive and to go to meet his God in peace. And first, to close off, let's just look at a few ideas on preserving cultural heritage and what all the implications that what he put in the play might have meant for us. So the plays treat with matters related to both cultural and personal identity, and I think that they are subjects for careful study and elucidation, and perhaps we don't give them enough of that. So Walcott explores his own identity, the dual heritage, which we refer to in A Far Cry from Africa. His plays reveal his reconciliation with that duality, his acceptance of what he calls his West Indian identity. Several of the themes explore indigenous practices that are vital to the preservation of a cultural heritage. These include, but are not limited to, the following, which the plays in the collection Dream on Monkey Mountain, as well as several of the other plays, show. So, these themes include the dual heritage we spoke about, cultural influences on the shaping of a West Indian culture, the importance of finding one's true self, of having self-esteem and confidence in one's identity, the role of introspection in finding one's true self, the respect for nature, the sea, the forest, the landscape, avoiding violence as a solution to conflict, finding ways to resist and overcome oppression and subjugation, having respect for the wisdom of the older folk and caring for them in the old age, the importance of parental guidance and counseling, coping with poverty and the vicissitudes resulting from poverty, recognizing and rejecting the imposition of negative influences of colonialism. And as we listen to news items now about an increase in the crime rate in the region, as we read that St. Lucia had a homicide rate of 40 per 100,000 people in 2021, a rate similar to that of Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, now makes us one of the countries with the highest homicide rates of the region. We realize that there has been a shift from the early 90s when he was writing, and when the news of a single murder in those days was fodder for discussion for weeks and raised concerns about the deterioration of values. One of the scenes Walcott might have witnessed in those days could have been the crowds gathering around the courthouse to hear about the trial of the accused, or gathering at the prison gates on the day of the execution. The occurrence of a murder caused consternation then. However, we realize that cultures, like language, change over time. And the gradual increase in numbers of homicides over the past 10 years, I think, would have required then concerted attention to arrest the trend of increasing homicides. Here are some of the figures. CARICOM's awareness of the rising trend in crime across the region resulted in the identification of 4 possible causes. At least we didn't go up anymore between 21 and 22, but that number is still very high. If you go back to the one of the 1950s, we have come a long way in terms of relinquishing some of the things that would have prevented us from doing those things that cause death of people. So the 3 causes that they identified in their document, in their book, their paper, Creative and Productive Citizens for the 21st Century, which they produced in 1997, they said some of the causes for this deterioration: an increase in poverty, 2, increases in drug trafficking, domestic violence, lack of care for one another, which resulted in a deterioration in the quality of personal relationships. We might add, for example, laxity in monitoring stemming the flow of guns and ammunition to our islands as another one. We might add movement or drifting away from a culture in which adults in communities watched over youth, even those who were not their children, to help arrest any signs of deviant behavior. I'm certain you can add to this list. If you'll permit, I will share one incident about village care that I experienced when I was about 9 or 10. My mother sent me to Clark's drugstore on the boulevard to collect something for her. And I went happily walking from Waterworks Road right through, across Meeko Street, in the park between the registry and the then Inland Revenue Office. I was happily walking along and I was doing nothing. I got the thing and I went back home. And as soon as I entered the door, what do you think you were doing? You have these people calling me and saying you were doing something. You're dimwe, tifi masimans kafol. I said, what did I do? Apparently, I was walking along and having my imaginary companion walking beside me, and I was talking to the person and laughing and going on like that. So these old ladies stood up in the registry window. They saw me doing that, and they said, she mad. They called up my mother. Tifi uka fall, ikapale by koi. I mean, honestly, I didn't realize what I was doing, so I was quite bewildered. But it just showed, I just remember that I was reading this and saying, people would comment, and you're probably aware of this, they would call mothers to tell them what they saw their sons doing or their daughters doing. And they looked out, the village looking out for the person. Anyway, the CARICOM document to which I referred identified education as a primary means. That was in 1997 now. It identified education as a primary means by which a change in this direction might be effected. Now, if there is credence to the claim that the youth are primarily responsible for the increase in crime, that would suggest that whatever interventions were put in place after that pronouncement that education had to take care of it, these may not have been realized because the transformative actions, the transformative processes did not take effect. So I think that we need to look more closely at curricula. We need to ensure that what we offer include not just a staple academic diet, but a menu of subjects in the technical vocational field, practical subjects in the arts, in foundational computer science, in agricultural education, subjects that engage the students' interests and motivate them to advance their learning opportunities and prepare for productive working careers. The boys especially. Such a vision for education and ensuing intervention would necessarily involve parents and guardians in homeschool programs that would allow them to provide the support that learners need. Further, in considering the multi-dialectal situation that exists and the reality that many learners will acquire a first language that's not the standard variety that's used for schoolwork, programs would need to cater to the development of the child's home language and provide the means for multilingual and multiliteracy development. It's been too long that we've had children come to school speaking Creole and have them leaving school speaking Creole and not reading even Creole or English. That's a waste of cognitive gift. So, if we actually took care of what they came with, as research has shown, an approach like that would serve to develop the cognitive flexibility that facilitates learning and the development of proficiency. It at least might help to ensure that more young people would stem aberrant behaviors and it would initiate a transformation that leads to peaceful coexistence in our communities. So, placing emphasis from the early years on meaningful education and buttressing that with community activities, so we need to look there, start there, if we want to make this difference and begin to transform and do what Walcott said, preserve and at least have the resurgence that we need that would take us back to the values that make us recognize that we are a special people, a St. Lucian people with values and culture. So his dramatic work invites us to consider the worth of these principles and further exploration, discussion, and performance of his plays. I couldn't fit all of them onto the slide. These would be a start to exposing us, and especially the younger generations, to the principles and the values promoted in what I consider to be masterful contributions that his plays have made to our Caribbean culture and heritage. So it's with respect and appreciation for his contribution to that heritage, we say, thank you, Sir Derek. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Walcott. Thank you, Mr. Walcott, sir. So we say, and I thank you.
I don't know about you, but I found that so, so amazing. It was informative, it was passionate, it was courageous. I loved your singing. I think so. It's never too late. I was really moved by where you went towards the end as well, in terms of what his legacy means for us and what it means for St. Lucia, you know. I feel particularly connected to what you were speaking about in terms of his themes of cultural hybridity and multiculturalism. If you don't know, I come from St. Lucian parents. My background is St. Lucian, but I was born in the UK, and so I've spent my whole life being St. Lucian in the UK and British here. So there's just no... So it's interesting. And just thinking about, you know, the themes that he talks about in his plays of the integration of cultural hybridity and what that means in terms of establishing a West Indian culture, West Indian theatre, and a West Indian soul. And also, you know, what that might do for the development of the individual, you know, in terms of the wisdom you're speaking about, in, you know, in the older characters. Bearing all of that in mind, what do you think the arts have to offer in terms of us coming home, in terms of us, you know, like you know, the crime is rising, etc. You know, what do the arts specifically have to offer the youth, would you say? And should we bring you? Do you have a mic? Should we bring a mic? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I thought Walcott was hinting a lot at the arts. In Twilight, he talks about the value of even recognizing from very early on what performances could do to begin to have him imagine things differently. The arts not only give you the opportunity to learn about various ways in which people behave, how they respond, the attitudes, and to begin to foster a culture of, a culture of understanding, of a consciousness, that a national consciousness, which allows you to see, okay, this is not good for me to do because it's detrimental to everybody else. Looking at plays, at reading poetry, all of those things was one aspect of the arts. But actually beginning to perform yourself and getting into character, doing those things can teach you a lot about how you can actually begin to respond in different ways to situations, the various situations that you face in life. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's just one aspect of the arts, and there are all the other aspects that relate to other parts of it. The music, all of those things. When you think of those things, do we expose them to let them see how meaningful it could be for them if they actually learned them and became motivated to do something with them? I think we don't encourage that motivation, or we don't expose them enough so that the motivation to do it is not there. But if you want to engage people, it's more in the response to what the CARICOM paper said. They said it probably didn't work because what they focused on, I think, they didn't say it, I think, what they focused on was just style of teaching. So a teacher must be a facilitator of learning. What does it mean to be a facilitator of learning? You don't say. What does it mean for the student? What do you do to change the student or to engage the student? What do you do to make them an active participant, that they get so caught up in whatever it is they're studying, that will help them to see what this effect that has on them, enough for it to transform them and change their attitude and their minds to do something else. There is so much more that has to go into it than just the mechanistic thing of having them sit in class and talk back to you. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I think that Walcott hints at those things as being the meaningful things. In Meanings in Savaku, he touches on those things. That article in Savaku, and I think that's very important. But do we pay enough attention to those things? I think not. And when we talk about transformative transforming behaviors, we really have to go back and look at all the components that are necessary for doing it. And just standing in class and saying, you must not do this, is not going to make anybody do something different, no matter where you say it, okay?
Yeah.
So I don't know if my mother telling me that people were telling her that I was going mad made me stop talking to an imaginative character, but at least it didn't make me go mad, and she didn't take me to a psychiatrist. But the village watching over did help me to begin to think, and what am I doing when I walk in the street? So pay attention to my own behavior. See what I mean? So having people care for you and say, tell you that you are probably stepping over a line that's not acceptable. And that's what he's talking about when he talks about the village caring for the youth, that kind of thing. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think just feeling that you are seen and that you are watched as well is incredibly transformative, and it's grounding as well. And I think at the moment we've kind of lost touch of ourselves. I think, a lot of kids are being raised by devices. So it's tough. Yes, so we would like to open questions to the audience now. There are a couple of mics set up on two sides of the room, so please feel free. Don't be shy. We'd love to take some questions. I'm really enjoying looking around at people's faces and seeing everyone's looking around.
Mm-hmm. In fact, I don't. I'm not trying to be an eye specialist in the sense that not eyes, but me. I had the luck of being exposed both to Derek and Roderick because I was a member of the National Theatre Company when I was 16 years old. And I sought to try and understand both of them. And I saw this kind of, what you call, based on what you said, I saw the progression and the tumultuous kind of thinking. Why? Because, for example, he talks about in one of his poems, where shall I turn divided to the veil? Mm-hmm. However, he alludes to the fact that we are doing what is called an acculturization process, in that we are adopting the American culture. Therefore, okay, so in essence, he's a dreamer. He wants to change the society, yet he's resisting a dominant culture that is actually imposing itself on us. So you can actually understand the kind of revolution that is going on, quote unquote, in his mind. The other thing, when I listen to you, he also talks about his disappointment with the politicians and their unwillingness or inability to make specific changes with regards to their acts. What do I say about that? We in the Caribbean, we are a product of the kind of education that we have. A lot of these politicians were schooled outside, yet when they came back, what they concerned themselves with were bread and butter issues. Therefore, a man who is trying to feed himself, clothe himself, and house himself is highly unlikely to think about art and creation of art. Okay? It's highly unlikely. The other aspect also is when in tying up, when you talked about our education and so on, what is the way forward, what about crime, etc. I think one of the main things that we do, our education system has been patterned according to what was given to us. And one of the overriding things, okay, I was schooled there and I went abroad, I noticed one difference, that the British system, it teaches you to regurgitate. The best way that you bring it out, if it is close to the pattern that they give you, then you considered brilliant, an A student. But you see, you know what they do? They forget about creative thought and your ability to go out and to even create. Now, that is where Derek Walcott differs, because he was lucky in the sense that he was born at a time in a historical context that was different. West Indian literature did not exist, quote unquote, because Naipaul and all of them, they came afterwards. So Derek was a dreamer and he decided, well, let me change this thing. Okay, that is when Naipaul, CLR James, etc., all these people, Pan-Africanism, even with Sir Arthur Lewis. So you had the amalgamation of what you call the politics as well as the art. But then given the economics that we have, that is one of the main constraints that our art cannot develop because we lack the resources. I don't know what you think about it.
Lack of resources. Lack of resources is something that probably one would have to deal with. And I think politicians pay attention to dealing with lack of resources. But I don't know that we can equate having lack of resources with success in an education system that will allow you to realize your gifts, will allow you to build those gifts, to become an artist, a painter who could probably sell your art, to become a writer, to use the language. He talks about the language that he got. And because as you said, the time he was born, he really he was appreciative of the education because it taught him a lot about poetry, about Greek and Latin, and it opened up his mind to the possibilities. When we're being educated, having our minds open to possibilities is one of the things that we expect. Okay? So through the arts, even if I'm a poor person sitting here, but I can see, I'm in school and I'm learning those things, I can see perhaps a possibility that can help to lift me out of those arts. In Tijan, it was resourcefulness that got him to defeat the planter. Okay? It wasn't book learning like Méjean. Méjean learned all these wonderful quotations from the books and kept regurgitating them to the devil. It only caused him to be eaten very quickly. Yes? But Tijan, using his mind, because he had listened to the wisdom of the people before him, he was able to see the possibility of actually liberating himself, okay, and his people from that. So I think it's having the mind. What Walcott talks about is self-reflection, and I didn't talk enough about that, but it's a big thing in his plays. Having the kind of self-reflection to realize who you are, what your gifts are, and how you can begin to transform yourself. In Dream on Monkey Mountain, this is Macaque. Macaque begins by just being unsure. They ask him, "What is your name?" "I'm tired." No self-esteem. He's totally depleted of all of the things that actually, would make him Macaque. He doesn't remember his real name. But he goes through in this dream a whole process of self-exploration, okay, introspection, that helps him to realize that he has to discard this fantasy that he has about this white apparition, this white spirit. He gets rid of that. And the process of transformation begins as he begins to reflect on himself, okay, and to see the things that need to change. So that at the end, he's happy to go back up to be a charcoal burner on Monkey Mountain, but then to live and carve for himself a life that will allow him to eke or earn some money from what his chosen career is. You see what I'm saying? So the liberation has to come from within, but you have to help people to have the tools to be able to go through that and to liberate themselves. So education, just to add that as an addendum, has that possibility, that potential. But my concern is that we don't show people how to use that potential. It's like telling them what to do and don't do, and not creating the kind of active participation with questioning that will allow them to begin to ask themselves questions of themselves, that will allow them to explore other possibilities. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to let you know also, if anyone has... Raisa?
Good evening, good morning. I have
Good night.
two quick points/questions. The first is, what do we do now? We're in a beautiful space where you're sharing brilliant ideas. But every time I come to lectures like this, I feel like I'm part of the privileged few. And the persons who need to hear you are the students who are choosing subjects like theater and literature, but then their parents or their peers will tell them, what do I do with this? How do I survive or live? And I'm thinking that we're into our 30th year of the Nobel laureate celebrations and festivities. And I think we need to be bigger in the sense that we need to be national and more grassroots based so that others can benefit from the wealth of knowledge that you are now sharing. Because I think more young people need to hear you. They need to be able to connect the strands of what it is that Walcott presents as a total theatre, because listening to the presentations of all the different pieces that are sewn together are things that we continue to debate today. Whether we're planning for emancipation, whether we're thinking about education, or we're speaking about our first to now speak to colony, all of the work is coming back again, and it's coming from us, but we don't even know that this work exists. It remains something that is obscure and relegated to a select few. So how do we look outward instead of just being inward into this space that we are in now?
You're asking me that?
Well, all of us. So we are privileged, but we have to make sure our privilege is not just for us. So I'm asking all of us, including you. And no, an excellent presentation.
Thank you, Raisa. I think you could start with asking that question. The Cultural Development Foundation can take it up as a serious question to be discussed. But again, if you do that and you have the input of different people, you can begin to look at the various strands in which this can be done. Walcott talked about the arts. He talked about education. He talked about self-development. What are the things in these areas, just to choose 3, that are important for us to begin to think about and to begin to integrate programs that would help us to make a meaningful difference? I think it's a generational thing that has to happen if we are going to transform the current trend that we talked about at the end. You have to start in the youngest age, so that you begin to transform the thinking and the mind to do what he calls the resurgence of culture. If you want to preserve some of the values that you really treasured of the old culture. And then you have what he called the fusion of the two. What are the things we value? Do we know them? We have to ask ourselves those. Okay, you start there. What are the things we want to get to? How do we overcome that barrier that has really taken it away from us? And that's another discussion that you have to sit down and go through and begin to plan what kinds of practical attention, actions you can do within, not just within the classroom, but within all the other, in all the other contexts in which you have young people. How do you make what they do meaningful enough for them to see a future, of a possibility of a future that is liberating? Yeah? Liberating, and one that helps them to build such a national consciousness that they cannot see themselves succumbing to the, let's call it wiles, because that's what the Papa Bois was saying, succumbing to wiles like that would help you to prostitute yourself to do things that are not in keeping with what is accepted generally for good nationhood and good living. That would be like not just getting a gun because it's nice and fun to shoot one. All of these things.
Absolutely. It's really interesting because I feel like there are two strands in a way in terms of how arts can be used in education. There's the strand of it becoming a career, and then there's a strand of it being a means of self-awareness. So, we have another question. But before we go to that question, I'm curious, do you feel like in the same way that Walcott spoke of a West Indian theatre, we need a West Indian pedagogy? And if so, how do we go about establishing that for both the career and in terms of self-awareness?
I can only say what I learned from being in Roddy's theatre group. It really helped me to understand the characters. For example, Délice in Chanson Marianne, which I was trying to play for. When you read the play, if you really begin to talk about it on stage, you see, I'm talking about it here and I'm giving examples, and it's people who understand it say, yes, I understand. But when you try to get in character, when you interact with another character and you're saying things, it brings you to a level of understanding and consciousness that really begins to make you think about the issues that you're dealing with on stage. So the practical experience of it is very important, I would say. That's one thing, and I don't think we do enough of it for our young people. That's one thing. And then, how do you begin to fashion a pedagogy that will begin to lead you out of whatever mire you're in? You see, there are two strands, and you're going to probably need much more discussion among different groups. You have to begin to be aware of those people in those areas that can help to make a contribution towards some specific area that you can do. So it's what Walcott would talk about, community, and what he did with his theatre group, having them come and work together to solve particular problems. Yeah, it's just an example of how he did it for his theatre, and they got results, and they solved problems. So it's the same kind of principle that you would use in broader life. Yeah, and I'm saying it because of Walcott, because this is what we're talking about. But he did give us these examples, these little glimpses into what can be done. If you take it and expand it to beyond the arts, then you can begin to see that this approach could work in so many other ways. Yeah?
Absolutely. I would love to say to everyone, if you have any ideas about how to reach out to young people with the arts, I'd be very interested to get involved. I have a son who's 15. He's a big reader and a writer, and it's and it does increase soulfulness. And now we will move on to our questions from the audience, sir.
Okay. First, I'd like to say thank you very much for a very thought-provoking presentation. There was one issue that really kind of stuck in my mind, which was this issue of, what is this Caribbean identity? And you said that Walcott had said, before they were proud to be British, now they're African, nobody wants to be Caribbean. I think that's something that we need to explore, because the historical reality of the Caribbean is that it's been formed, the modern Caribbean has been formed within the context of European domination, Eurocentrism, indigenous genocide, enslavement of Africans, and there's a whole kind of baggage that comes with that. So the reality is, so when Derek was at school, he did Latin, he did Greek, he didn't do ancient Chinese, he didn't do Ge'ez, he didn't do Swahili. So that there is an issue that has to be resolved, in the sense that when we talk about ourselves as a Caribbean people, we have to understand what it is that we're breaking away from in order to create the new. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, he did say that, but he talked about syncretism. He talked about the whole idea of not just rejecting something for the sake of rejecting it. Take what he said about Africa. The Back to Africa movement. He's saying, how can you go back to something that you have moved so far away from? Can you impose it now on your culture and expect your culture to continue to survive and develop in the ways that you want? So that the West Indian culture that he's talking about is something that has really evolved. Cultures change. And from moving away from that period that you referred to, it would be something of a stretch, not just of imagination, but of behavior, for us to go back to a situation where we were embracing the norms, the mores of a culture that we had moved away from for so long. So you see what I'm saying? What you do is what he says, you look at what you have, and you try to make sure you accept what you think has formed you, has shaped you, and you begin to take that forward to make it realize the best that it can be. So what you said about the language part of it, though, it's what was taught at the time, and it was beneficial to him then. So the Mandarin and the Chinese, if this is something that has come to influence your culture now, you need to know how to deal with it. To what extent are you going to do that? Are there opportunities for people to learn these, and what are those opportunities? And present it to them. You see what I'm saying? But the whole business of, I was going to make another point. That's what happens when you... Yeah. If it comes back to me, I'll tell you what it is. Yeah.
In the meantime, sir.
Good evening. Wonderful presentation. I was really at the edge of my seat on many of the things that you brought forward. I'm trying to answer the question with the arts and how do we reach the youth and what have you. So I was just thinking, just throwing out a question. What do you think, maybe for the Cultural Development Foundation and the powers that be, if we can take a lot of the the punchlines that you use, a lot of the important messages from those plays and the important scenes that bring out the love for family, the love for the animals, and maybe package that in very short, meaningful, maybe TikTok videos or anything that would reach the youth now, because it's those messages that you want to get out there, but you want them to see the arts being performed. You want them to appreciate the wisdom and contribution of Derek Walcott. Even long ago, he speaks to those things that are still issues now, and we still have to address, and we still have to. So we can take all the wisdom from his plays and all the little things and maybe package them in exciting new ways with technology. So what do you think about that?
I think you answered your own question, that you exposed them to Walcott. Let them perform Walcott. Let them perform Roddy's plays like we used to do when we were growing up. You know, being part of Roddy's group, you know, the creative arts, that was something that opened up, you know. How many of you were in Roddy's group? I mean, I'm sure there must be people who were in my class who actually, Kendall was there. I see you perform something. What did you think that experience meant for you? I wasn't there with Derek, but I certainly was exposed to what performance and to what understanding and reading of a play could be. What do you think?
Yes, I suppose not for me. It's not just a matter of me being within. I was not like a full-time member of Roddy's group, but yeah, I did work with them at different times. But for me, it goes back further than that, and I'm going to come around to what you're saying. But it seems to me, looking back, well before I ever ended up being directed by Roddy, his mother, teacher Alex, at the Methodist Infant School, called A Song in Old. I could remember being in a Christmas play that we children were performing. I think I was one of the wise men, and it seemed to me that thing like putting on plays, not necessarily big fancy plays, but putting on dramatic productions at end of term, Easter, Christmas was a normal part of school life. Totally normal. When I was at St. Mary's College, it was the same thing. Brother Joachim Stack had us performing. You know, he had a drama group, and he had us performing at the town hall at different times and so on. All that was completely normal. Yeah, I mean, I know from my own experience, personally, practically, and also from teaching dramatic literature, from teaching theater. Something happens to you when you have to do a part, and you got to go into, as best you can, you have to go into the mind, into the body, into the nerves of the person that you're trying to portray. You will do it imperfectly, but there's something that you'll come to understand about what it is to be like that. That someone could preach it at you 50 billion times, you will not get it because it'll just go to the brain, you know. Theater and whole other art forms too, but we're talking theater, makes it go into the body, makes it go into the nerves, and that's where the learning happens. That's where the possibility for change happens. Yes. You have to take it in the brain, but that alone will never, ever, 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 ever do it. Mm-hmm. And theater offers the possibility of it going further than that. Yeah.
The thing about what we did at primary school, that's very important because we did that. And just a little quip about teacher Alex. I never knew a person who did not pay attention to you. Every day when I walked to school, to Taybell School, on Marianne Street, I had to pass right in front there. She would always talk to the children, all of us passing by there. I mean, there was something about the people in those ages who would make sure they connected with younger children, younger people. And then in the school, you found those teachers who actually helped you to. The recitation, you did a lot of that, and then you had to understand why. Okay, of all the beauty spots on earth, the fairest and the best are the jewels. This, my God, I must have learned in Standard 1. And then, of course, begin to realize what it means. You know, what are you talking about? It's nature. What are the beauty spots in St. Lucia? You discuss those. You begin to open up your mind to what's around you. And that's why I'm saying to have just identified for example, being a facilitator of learning, you'd have to say what being a facilitator of learning means in very practical terms, because it's all of those things, and it's not just, giving people information that they have to regurgitate. These things you need to understand in your craft for you to be able to make a difference for the people you are exposed to. So, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kendall. Yes, Miss.
Good evening. I heard during the conversation or hearing when other people were speaking, there was a lot of talking about providing things for people, especially the youth, as I am a part of the youth. And I can say, have you ever heard of the argument about the blue curtain? There's an argument about when you speak of the blue curtain in a passage, people see a blue curtain. But then there's the argument that the English teacher that they joke about will tell you the blue curtain has more to it. The color, the way it blows in the wind, the meaning, the setting, characters, what they do about this blue thing. And when you think of it again, and you put it in perspective of the Caribbean, it's like being a Caribbean person living in a Caribbean household. There's a blue curtain that's closed, and a child might see it as just a blue curtain. But if they don't open that blue curtain, they won't realize just how beautiful outside is. The sunlight being Caribbean art. It's very colorful. It's very meaningful. We just don't know how to talk about it technically. Because looking at the colors on these paintings out here, I see a lot of oranges, reds. That's history to some extent. I may not know what exactly it is, but I see it because I grew up in the Caribbean. I decided to blossom from the Caribbean's ground. And I see a Rasta. That's also a part of culture. I may not know exactly where, but I know it's a part of culture. It's beautiful in its Weru sense. So I decided to open that blue curtain, that curtain that was oppressing me or suppressing me from seeing the beauty of the Caribbean. And a lot of youth are stuck in their Caribbean household, never opening that curtain. And the problem I see is that people will always tell us to open that curtain. But sometimes people need that curtain to be opened for them because I wasn't able to open it. I'm a science student, and then I changed my major to literature and the human sciences because that curtain was partially opened for me, but I had to completely open it and decide to look out the window and realize, wow, the Caribbean is gorgeous. I've never seen greener trees. I've never seen crystal clear waters like that before. Even when it rains and the water is muddy, it's still beautiful. It's still mesmerizing. I can even imagine it myself right now. The water's going back, and even though there are a whole bunch of rocks from the rain, it's still beautiful. It's still the Caribbean. It's still my home, and not many people know about it. So even international people, they speak of the Caribbean. It's only 2 islands, Jamaica, Trinidad. Nobody knows about Little St. Lucia, and we're gorgeous. We're more than gorgeous. There are other words I can't express right now, but it's a beautiful place. So I think for youth, like my friends, because I had to open the curtain for them, we shouldn't just tell them, open the curtain. We shouldn't just tell them that it's blue because of sadness, it's blue because of this. We should help them. We should actually do it for them in a sense. And then the next morning when they wake up, they'll decide to open that blue curtain if they really wanted to, rather than just telling them, do it, because you have to.
That's an excellent metaphor. Thank you. Thank you. And I think you hinted at what needs to be done, how to open. No, seriously, though. It's an excellent metaphor, and you talked about how you would want to open that, okay? So it's in terms of how you bring people to understand that curtain and what lies behind it. So if I just tell you that it's those things, you hear me, but you may not be motivated to open it at all. So it's trying to get you to be curious about how to open it. Then that will start the process. So thanks for that. It's very good. Thank you.
Amazing. I feel like it harks to what Kendall was saying as well about the embodiment possible by theatre, by embodying things, and you open that curtain as well. But I applaud you for that really thoughtful comment. Yes, sir.
Hi, good night to everyone. Good night to everyone here. And to acknowledge with my age and in a room of such esteemed individuals, to say that I don't have the exact experience to speak on every factor that I can speak, but in the little time that I've had, in the few schools that I've been through, my primary school experience, secondary school experience at St. Mary's College, by the way, to represent, I feel like for the arts in particular, and culture, especially in St. Lucia in particular, that the emphasis placed on the arts, the underappreciation of the arts, downright criminal, obviously. And especially as it's represented in the curriculum in St. Lucia in particular, where the arts are treated as more so a niche or a bonus, something to be added alongside what you major in. Whether if you're a business student, then you're a business student and you may have an art subject on the side, or you may have an art hobby, you may be into dance, you may be into poetry, drama and whatnot, but it's not being given the emphasis as a career path or particularly as a field that you want to study and a field that you want to blossom in artistically. And going into just backwards to my days in primary school as well, where, of course, there would be a few little productions. They'd wait for occasions. It would be Journée Creole, Independence, Nobel Laureates Week. They'd wait for their little dramatic productions. But I don't feel like it should be relegated to occasions. It shouldn't be an occasion that needs to create like opportunities for the students to engage with these literary elements. I personally believe that instead of just having in the curriculum situations to commemorate the culture, there should be things to promote the children, to create the culture themselves. They shouldn't just have to wait for times where people are supposed to celebrate culture to celebrate culture. They should actively want to create culture. And going into secondary school, St. Mary's College as well, of course, they try, especially producing such an esteemed man as Derek Walcott himself. They show us, they tell us, they make sure to emphasize to us that the holistic approach in creating their students, that they should respect the arts, they should respect character especially. But I believe as well, having the theatre subject separated, theatre arts and whatnot, I believe in some of these things that should be somewhat mandatory to think, oh, these students should practice at least just so they could be expressive, so they should understand how they can say what they want to say, so they can tell people their points, so they can be better at collaboration. When we have the few that we had, when we have the little stage productions and whatnot, the collaboration of the boys, especially at SMC, it's grand, it's amazing what they put together, just with the little help of the teachers, because the teachers leave it to us as typically wholly independent ventures. They believe in our ability to put on dramatic pieces because they teach us, they inform us of it, they have the basis, they have the education, they give us the knowledge. And I just believe if it's just given a little more priority in the education system, that it could be a fully possible venture for these students, because it's not, for me especially, where I've had interest in literature for most of my life. I've been reading lots of novels, especially my mother was a reader, and it's not, for me, it wasn't a matter of lacking interest, it was just having the materials, and that's what I think that they need, because as long as I had novels around me, then I'd read the novels. And in the schools, primary schools especially, some of the states of the libraries and whatnot, the facilities are lacking for the students. Even if you have students, diamonds in the rough, that want to read, that want to express themselves, some facilities in certain primary schools are lacking to facilitate that. And in certain secondary schools as well, they lack the materials. So I just, as a hope, less so a question, as a hope that some priority is placed towards drama and the arts in St. Lucia as things proceed. Thank you.
A wonderful comment, and I think that it's really important to talk about, how important it is to create culture as well as preserve it. I think we have a lot of talk about preserving culture. So thank you so much for that comment. It was very insightful.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I think I'm going to shift a little bit to your area of expertise, which is language and looking at our vernacular. Derek was not inhibited in using the Creole and all of our varieties. What role do you see language playing in all of what we're speaking about? The way we use language, the way we teach language in schools, how does that contribute to that general discussion of us not being able to explore our culture and art? So I just want to focus the shift to language. I hope it's not another lecture in itself, but I want to take it back there to your area of expertise.
If you looked at the examples from Derek's work, you will see how use of the Creole and the Creole English helped to enrich what he had to say. And this multilingualism, this multidialectism is something that we have ignored. And it's one of the saddest things, because children, we never did use language. See, he was able to he understood the Creole, he knew it, and he used it creatively in his writing. That made him a very successful writer. So if you think about that and you think of children coming to school, for example, and I'll try not to make it a lecture. Children coming to school speaking only Creole, and then you just let them stay there, and then you put them in a little group. When you have time, you work with them, but you do nothing to nurture that. And you probably assume that it's not possible to be literate in it. That's the first mistake. So it's a change in attitude, a change in thought, that language, it has a grammar, it has everything it's used to express yourself very effectively. So there are ways to make sure that you can become literate in it. The possibilities of becoming literate in it and writing. Okay, for example, take Confiant in Martinique, can write whole novels in French Creole. The variety that's in between, the English lexicon vernacular, the same thing. You know, if you know the differences between that and the standard, you can use both to excellent effect, which is what Walcott also did. If you go back and you look at those examples, you will see that he uses all three to effect. So language, or the particular language that you speak, if it's Creole, you do not make me feel that it is not important, that is useless, that it is bad, because what you do is you erode something much more fundamental to my identity. You erode my esteem, my self-esteem, because there is a close relationship between identity and language. And if I keep telling you in school, Papa le sa, don't speak that, it's wrong. I am doing enormous damage to you as a person. So that change of mind has to happen first off. That's all I'd say.
Good evening, everybody. I am a teacher. I've been a teacher for a few years now. And I want us to do two things. First of all, to look around. Look at who's sitting next to you. Look at who's sitting behind you. Look at the demographic. Where are the youth? Where are the children? Where are the students? We've been privileged to have a few young persons speak and share their thinking, their thoughts, and we are quite surprised, although I am not, at the depth and the level of their thinking and understanding and discussion. And I want us to understand that this is not something that's just a one-off. That if we listen to the students and we engage with them, we will realize that there is so much that they have to offer if we listen. Secondly, I want us to look around again and note that there are persons like Kendall Hippolyte, who taught me, and I see a couple of my classmates here, taught me literature, taught me theater arts at varying levels of my life. And then I am even prouder to say that I have one of my past literature students here. And then I have one of my current literature students here. And it shows that there is continuity. And we need to focus on that continuity. But I am saddened to say that when I listen, and in as much as there's so much to learn, there are so many lessons looking and delving in the work of Walcott and all of the literary giants that exist in St. Lucia, I ask myself, how do we make that? How do we translate that to make them understand, to make them engage with it? And we talk about how Walcott merged so many different things to create the West Indian identity. That identity, as we understand, is changing. What we saw was acceptable then and what is acceptable now is changing. And who do we engage to help us understand and help us see and help translate and translate that discussion, that exploration of life and culture and history to what is now, which is still culture, which is still history, with history in the making, that they have to become part of. So when we talk about Walcott and all of the other giants, and we look at what they've produced and what they've created as if it's detached from what is experience now, it will never go beyond the 50 people in their 60s sitting in this room. It will not go beyond that. I'm sorry. No, please. How do we translate that? How do we translate that to the 14-year-old sitting now next to me? And while we listened to you and we listened to all the beautiful comments, I asked her questions and she engaged. And she asked, I wish she would come and stand here and express some of the things that she was thinking and feeling while this discussion happens. And I think that's what we need a little more of. While these discussions are happening, ask them questions. Interact with them. Understand what they're thinking, how they're taking what you're saying, how they're making it their understanding. How are they taking it, and how can we make it accessible to them? That is the important thing. We do it in our schools. Yeah, we do Tisha and his brothers in Form 1, and my children love Tisha and his brothers in our lit class. But how do we really make them understand and value and love and create and transform? Because that's what Walcott did. He transformed what he had. For him, it was the British and West Indian, African, whatever. For me, it's 4 or 5 different things. For them, it's even more. For them, it's the pieces of words that they use to create their new language that they're using on WhatsApp and TikTok and all of those things. How do we merge it? And when we get to the point of merging is the only time we're actually going to see that continuation and that resurgence of what we really want to see.
Okay, and I thank you all so much for those insightful comments and those wonderful questions. Please join me again in giving a round of applause to the Honourable Ms. Hazel Simmons-McDonald. We also thank the organisers. Okay. I'm trying to interpret some sign language. I'm just going to say that because I know that my face is going to be like, what is happening? Is she okay? We have something coming. Is it gifts? Oh, okay. All right. I'd like to introduce Maya Clerville Cultural Development Foundation. I'm so sorry. I got it in the end. That's it.
Good night, everyone. Allow me to adopt protocol that has already been established. On behalf of the Government of St. Lucia, the Nobel Laureate Committee, Board and Directors, Management and staff of the Cultural Development Foundation, it is my privilege to say thank you on this occasion. As tonight would not have been possible without the extended hands of the Government of St. Lucia, Office of the Governor General, Ministry of Tourism, Information, Broadcasting, Culture and Creative Industries, Bank of St. Lucia, FLO, and the Cultural Development Foundation. Also extending our sincere thank you to the audience and viewers for their continuous support and cooperation. An event of this nature would not have been possible without our esteemed lecturer, Honorable Hazel Simmons-McDonald, for her inspiring and informative deliberation on this year's theme. Walcott's play, a creative exploration of St. Lucian culture and identity. Tonight, by expressing our gratitude, we offer this token to you. The Nobel Laureate Festival Committee St. Lucia expresses its sincerest appreciation to Honorable Hazel Simmons-McDonald, SLC, OBE, for presenting the 2023 Sir Derek Walcott Memorial Lecture, January 17th, 2023.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. That's going to go on my wall. Very nice. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you once again, audience, for showing up. We also have eats and drinks to the outside, to your right. Thank you once again.